and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. The government is planning to enact a Senior Citizens Act to better protect the welfare and rights of the elderly. The need for such legislation has been considered for more than a decade now, but we have confirmation from the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development that it will table for the first reading a senior citizens bill in Parliament by next year. Joining me on the show today to discuss this further, I have Associate Professor Dr. Rahimah Ibrahim. She's the Deputy Director of the Malaysian Research Institute on Aging, or My Aging, which is under UPM. Dr. Rahimah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Now, part of this announcement, the government's announcement that it plans to table a senior citizens bill by next year is an inclusion of part of this proposed legislation is a penalty for people who send their elderly parents to care facilities or to old folks' homes, or even, a suggestion has been made for mandated salary deductions. I think that the Deputy Minister said to hold irresponsible children accountable for their parents' care. I'm wondering what you make of all this, Dr. Rahimah.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the question. I think it is time for us to stop linking the suggestions for penalties for people who send their elderly parents to aged care facilities under the Senior Citizens Bill. Because while some people may consider this as a form of abandonment, this is a very much oversimplified assumption. And this has contributed to the continued social stigma for people who send their parents to the homes. And this situation has hindered the growth and emergence of a professional and modern aged care industry. So when we are talking about the older persons bill, we should ask ourselves why some parliamentarians view aged care facilities, whether they are paid or charity-based, as something essentially negative. And so far, we have some the legislative effort so far should focus on elder abuse, neglect, and maltreatment in multiple settings, and not bringing up about this filial piety
Right.
as a moralistic ideals.
I do love this point that you've brought up, because I think, let's unpack that a little bit more. Why do you think some parliamentarians consider sending parents to care facilities as a negative, as a weakness, as a form of abandonment? There are some governments, particularly Asian governments, that continue to promote the idea that children should be primarily responsible for the care of older family members. How should we be thinking about elderly care in the modern age? What is that intersection between government policy and cultural values?
The care of older family members have been, provided by families for generations, and during this time, because of more people working and entering the labor market, so and also because of demographic changes, the family size getting smaller, and therefore not enough people to care for aging family members. So the family needs support, and to a certain extent, these support are not easily available, or if they are available, it is not everyone can afford the services. To get these services, to pay for these services of care, of having care at home, of taking care of older family members at home. So,
Dr. Rahimah, sorry to interrupt very quickly. Just now you mentioned modern aged care. Can I get you to elaborate what you mean by that?
okay, modern aged care. We need more professional caregivers who knows how to manage the multiple chronic problems that older persons may have, and to provide the care that uh, with more empathy, and that allows people to have a dignity in care. So these are skills, and uh, as many caregivers mentioned to me, they enter the caregiving situation unprepared, and they don't know what to do. And when these things happen, they have to quickly find resources and ask friends or other people how to provide the best care for their parents. So we need like a training for formal and informal caregivers, meaning that formal caregivers are people who get who gets paid to provide care services, but also not forgetting the informal caregivers, who are the family members, the neighbors, the friends, yeah, of all older or aging family members. Also, uh, to to also have the skills to provide the necessary care that they need. So, so this is to make sure that we can live our old age with the support of people around us, whether be it from our family members, the community, or from the government.
Right. So this is kind of the idea of aging in place, right? Aging where you live. How can the government better support this ethos, better support the idea of aging in place, and be involved in elderly care, even when considering that most elderly care is provided by family members?
Um, yeah, we sent our children to daycare centers, kindergartens, and or to be raised by maids. So, uh, why do we object to older persons being sent to a facility like a daycare facility, or even a residential care facility? Would it be in the interest of the elderly in nursing care to be sent home every day in the name of filial piety? So, if if a ch- sorry, when a child or children pool their resources to get private care for their aging parents, does this make them unfilial? It- Because when we send our parents, yeah, we don't want to lose this kind of bonds. Caregivers who make it a point for family members to visit uh, uh, the
Right.
older persons, yeah, in the residential care centers. So, and when an elderly check himself or herself into a facility and they pay for it, uh, for the services themselves, is it i- is it not an abandonment then? So these are some these issues are mixed with taboos and
Mm.
social stigma. So we want to promote family caregiving, but the family needs help, and therefore we need more alternative services in the community, so that people can go to work, and also they can take care of their they can perform
Right.
their responsibilities of taking care of their family members. But
What kind,
yeah
sorry, yeah, you were saying right now?
right now there's not much support, and people have to pay it for out of their pocket.
Okay. What can you elaborate? What kind of support can the government provide for family members, for caregivers? You mentioned paying out of pocket, so I assume financial support is one area of support. But what other areas of support, of policy intervention, can governments do to create this ecosystem for elder care?
Okay, so if the I mean, for the government to be involved in elderly care, of course, they were talking about the bill, but the older person's bill itself can take many forms. and we have to consider about legislation in the sense that there is no overarching or super law that can take care all of our issues in aged care. So we currently we have the 802 Act, 802, which is the uh, pri- uh, Private Age Healthcare Facilities and Services Act, yeah, 2018. And this act tries to regulate the aged healthcare facilities and services. Um, and we are still waiting for the regulations for this particular act. And we also have the Minimum Retirement Age Act, and this is to deal with private sector employment. So we need a multitude of laws, but most importantly, a new legislation must meet some pressing demand and is enforceable and has a clear purpose. We should not have, we should not dream of like a super law and then we can enforce it. So
Right.
yeah, we need
So,
a law. We need a law for elder abuse and neglect because the research has shown that uh, in other countries, older persons need special protection, especially from financial fraud, maltreatment from carers, and physical abuse, uh, as they become frail and more frail and vulnerable.
mm,
Right. Okay. So again, you can't expect one kind of super law to solve everything. It really needs to be a kind of national framework supported by the right legislation. Dr. Rahima, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I appreciate your time. That was Associate Professor Dr. Rahima Ibrahim from the Malaysian Research Institute on Aging. My Aging under UPM. We're going to take a very quick break here on Consider This. We will be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the proposed Senior Citizens Act, which may include penalties for people who send their elderly parents to care facilities or old folks' homes. Now, let's speak to Lily Fu. She's a gerontologist and Vice President of the University of the Third Age for KL and Selangor, which is an NGO that offers lifelong learning programs. She's also the founder of Seniors Aloud, which is an online community for seniors. Lily, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Let's talk about this proposed Senior Citizens Act that could include penalties for people who send their parents to aged care facilities. What do you make of all of this?
Thank you for having me on the show. Yeah, no, there's a lot of media exposure, attention paid on to this topic, Senior Citizens Bill. But to be honest, I think we do not know the details, right? It's just what has come up is that everybody's talking about punishment, penalty, and so forth. I think that shouldn't be the focus. But personally, from my point of view, there's a lot to, investigate. There's a lot of reasons behind why this has become a topic, that this is a punishment thing, right? It's not just, it's like, children examine why is it that we are hearing more cases of abandonment or elder abuse. What has led to this? So the causes must be examined. And the blame is not entirely on the adult children.
right.
You have to understand them as well, the circumstances.
So do you think the reason why this part of the legislation is meant to protect elderly welfare, the welfare of the elderly and the rights of the elderly? Essentially, that's the point of the legislation. But why do you think that this portion, the penalty on children, has gotten so much traction? Is it because of the way we view we as society view sending parents to an old folks home as a failure of filial piety in some respect?
But then, we must also understand that today, the family today is no longer the what we call under one roof kind of family, where there's always someone in the house to look after the youngest, the babies, for example, and the oldest in the family. There's always somebody around. But today, we talk about nuclear family, which means it comes down only just the core family. So when now both husband and wife, they go to work. So the elderly parent is left alone at home. And sometimes, with the pressure of work and so on, social economic factors play a huge, huge part in this. So we have to understand all these factors before we just, across the board, say we introduce punishment for anyone, any child, who sends the parent to a nursing home or abandon them. I mean, abandonment is no excuse, okay?
Right.
The
Yeah.
abuse is no excuse.
That's two different things, right?
Right,
Sending
right.
to an aged
Yes,
care and
absolutely.
elder abuse and abandonment, that's two separate things.
Yes, two separate
Okay.
things. So there must be this clear understanding and division, because some children, they are overseas. There's a large number of cases now of senior citizens staying alone or with the husband, with the spouse, right? But it's not because of they want to. Sometimes they can't help it. The children are overseas studying, or they have settled down overseas, or even in Malaysia, there could be another town. So who is there to look after the elderly parent? Sometimes they have no choice.
So, in what ways can, if we were to separate the two issues and we focus on elder abuse, neglect, and abandonment, and that portion of those issues, what do you think can be done to address the underlying causes of why people abuse elders, neglect elders, abandon elders?
It's a lot to do with family dynamics as well, or the lack of it, right? So when both the son, for example, the son and the daughter-in-law, for example, both are working, and if they have also their own children, young children to take care of, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure down there. And quite often, even with a double income, it's not sufficient to look after an elderly parent who may need some medical attention, medical treatment, or rehabilitation. All that costs money. So not every family can afford that. So, plus the stress, the pressure, and, economic circumstances, sometimes you just get short-tempered. So that's where the abuse comes in. Sometimes people think of abuse as physical, not necessarily so. There's also the psychological aspect of abuse. Harsh words, for example, or, no affection shown to the elderly parent. You just ignore them. You become their voice. They have no choice in anything at all. That is a form of abuse as well. So it's not all physical. And it is very hard for the elderly parent to take this every day of their lives. And then they get into depression, right? And depression can easily lead into suicidal thoughts. That's why, you hear a lot of elderly saying, I don't want to grow old. It's better that I die, for example. It's very common when you talk to those who are suffering in silence. They have nowhere to turn to, no one to turn to. And quite often, if they are still suffering abuse at home, it's a shame. It's like a shame. It's a social stigma. So they keep it all within the family. They don't want to air it out in public or seek help elsewhere. Right? So there's a lot of factors involved in.
Right. Lily, you a couple of years ago made a documentary titled Minit Essentia, or The Twilight Years in English. It explored the issue of the elderly who had been left to fend for themselves in aged care centres. Can you tell me a little bit about what you learnt while making that documentary about the gaps in our system, about the gaps in elder care in Malaysia?
Yeah, what I learned, not so much directly from the residents there, because some of them have got dementia, Alzheimer's, and they are not able to explain the situation very much. But, from the Puan Muji Sulaiman, who runs the place, right? She has given me some insight into the home and the residents' stories. For example, there was a case of one of the elderly. She had signed over her property to an organization, an NGO, right, out of the goodness of her heart. But then what happened was that once she signed over the papers, she lost complete control of her property. a property that gave her sustenance in the sense of she collected rental. Every month she collected rental, but now she no longer has that. So because of that, she was not able to fend for herself. She had to be sent to a home. So that is one case I heard of. There was another case where this elderly lady, she had family, children and all, but she was abused at home, physically abused, mentally, physically as well as psychologically abused. So that's another factor as well. And she had nowhere to turn to. So Puan Muji accepted her.
So part of that documentary also highlighted the fact that a lot of these residential aged care homes are charity-based, NGO-based, not so much. There are so few government-run aged care centers. What do you think is the role of government? What role should the government be playing in providing elderly care versus, say, a policy that allows for older people to be cared at home or by the private sector? How do you see the government's role?
Well, the way I see it, it is a bit shocking to me personally that the whole country, there are only two government public runner, what we call Rumah Ehsan. Rumah Ehsan is for long-term care. And this is critical because what leads to elder abuse mainly, right, and to abandonment is long-term care. Most of the adult children cannot provide that long-term care. Short-term is okay, no problem, right? But long-term care over, like, you have some comorbidities like diabetes, Parkinson's. These are like long-term care kind of, problem. So because of that, we need more, nursing homes, publicly funded nursing homes. The government too is definitely not enough, right, for the whole country. The one is in Kuala Kubu Baru, the other one is in Dungun, Terengganu. I mean, that's what I found out. The latest update. I don't know about the latest, could be more, but as so far from my research, I only found two.
Wow, that's an extraordinary thing to know, that there's so few. Lily, when we talk about support for caretakers for long-term care for elderly family members, what financial, caretaking is expensive. What financial support should be given to families to help cope? Because that's one of the reasons why many abandon their elderly parents.
Well, there was talk about tax, deduction for adult children who are supporting elderly parents, right? That's one. I think it's already been in practice, but I'm not quite clear how much the tax deduction is, right? And I think there's also application. Those who qualify are eligible to get help monthly, 500 from the government. But honestly, I'm not quite sure whether 500 is enough. Yes, there's a lot of medicine is very expensive. And of course, you can say, you can get medicine from the public hospitals, but the queue is so long to get an appointment. So there's a lot of things that need to be revised or improved in the government, the public health system. Public health is so vital. And we can always start with, raising awareness, making it easy, medicine, easily available, consultation with doctors easily available. But most of all is the family itself, the core family. There has to be some level of support for the adult children so that there'll be, not so much of no more elder abuse if possible. But at the same time, as I've often repeated, the elderly themselves, if they are aware of this could happen to them, so make sure that they themselves look after themselves, provide, have financial backing, make sure you've got enough savings. And I realized after talking to a lot of seniors in the community, the number of cases of seniors living alone is skyrocketing. So this is something we have to take into consideration. Many of them are single. They choose not to get married, or those who have married, their children are not with them. So it's an empty nest kind of thing. So who's going to look after them? Right? So, at some point of time, we all become less mobile, right? Maybe in our 80s or 90s. Of course, the age has gone up previously 60 something, you know, you're like becoming
Yeah.
baby. But
Alright.
80, 90. So you might need some help. So I learned a new term today, right? After Googling, you know, I learned a new term, and that's called social frailty. I just learned it today. And social frailty means you have reached a certain age, you know, when you're aging and you've got no support system. So you become frail, socially frail, not physically frail. And I think it's so true. And I also realized that who are the people, who are the elderly who get abused? I can tell you. Number one, if they, sorry to say, the female gender, if they are a woman, it's more likely, right? If they're poor, if they're not so educated, because money is power, say what you want, right? If you don't have enough financial support, you get abused by your own children sometimes. So these are some of the major causes.
All right.
Lily, well, thank you. We've run out of time, but thank you so much for speaking with me today. I appreciate your time. That was gerontologist Lily Fu wrapping up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.